There is something strangely beautiful about Lagos in the early mornings, before the traffic fully wakes up, before the shouting of conductors becomes background music, before ambitions start running at full speed through the city. But somewhere in all that noise and possibility, long before oil wells and billion-dollar conversations, there was simply a girl growing up under the roof of a wealthy but disciplined Nigerian home. A girl who had absolutely no idea that one day people across the world would speak her name whenever the conversation turned to powerful women in Africa. And her story begins far away from the version of success most people know about. Before the headlines, before wealth, before people started calling her one of the richest black women in the world, there was just a young Yoruba girl named Folorunsho Alakija, born on the 15th of July 1951 into the family of Chief Ogbara, a successful businessman who came from a prominent and financially comfortable background. She was one of the many children in a large family, and although her father was wealthy, life under his roof was not built around entitlement.
Bye, Mama.
There was structure, discipline, and expectations. Now here is where things already start sounding like the beginning of a movie. At just 7 years old, little Folorunsho was sent to the United Kingdom for school. Imagine that for a second. A Nigerian child in the 1950s sent abroad at such a young age, far away from home, and learning how to survive independently, and also adapting to an unfamiliar environment, while most children her age were still learning how to fully understand the world around them. And maybe life was already teaching her something early: how to adjust, how to survive new rooms, how to not fear unfamiliar territory. Years later, she returned to Nigeria and attended Muslim high school in Sagamu before traveling back abroad to continue her education at Pitman Central College in London, where she studied secretarial studies. Now, pause there for a second, because this part genuinely surprised me. Secretarial studies, not business administration, not oil and gas, not economics, not some billionaire coded degree people would expect from somebody who would eventually dominate conversations around wealth. And maybe there is something comforting in that, because sometimes the beginning of people's stories looks absolutely nothing like the ending. Folorunsho Alakija did not immediately step into the kind of life people now associate with billionaires. Long before the headlines and wealth, she was simply building a career quietly. She worked as an executive secretary at Tijuade Enterprises in Lagos, before later moving to the First National Bank of Chicago. And if you saw her back then, there was probably nothing that screamed future billionaire. She was simply learning, observing, and gathering skills that probably looked ordinary at the time, but would later become part of something much bigger. Somewhere between office files, meetings, and corporate routines, another interest slowly started growing inside her, and that was fashion. Not fashion in the casual, I like clothes kind of way, but fashion as identity, elegance, and business. So in the 1980s, she made a move many people are too afraid to make. She changed direction. She left the stability of corporate life and started a fashion business called Supreme Stitches, which later evolved into the Rose of Sharon House of Fashion. And this was not ordinary tailoring. Her designs slowly found their way into elite circles in Lagos, dressing high-profile women and influential figures. Through detail, consistency, and craftsmanship, Folorunsho built a reputation for herself in spaces many people spend decades trying to enter. Now, for many people, that would have been enough. A successful business, recognition, respect, financial comfort, you name it. But somehow, the biggest chapter of her life had not even started. Because in the early 1990s, she stepped into one of the hardest industries anybody could imagine at the time, which was oil. A space dominated by power, politics, influence, and men. Through her company, Famfa Oil, she applied for an oil prospecting license and eventually secured an OPL 216, an offshore oil block in Niger Delta. And if you understand Nigerian business, then you know this was not a small move. This was serious risk. The kind of decision that could either completely change your life or destroy everything you had spent years building. But success did not suddenly arrive with noise and celebration. For years, things were uncertain. Because despite what social media makes us believe, success is often quiet at the beginning. Sometimes, if not all times, it feels like waiting. Sometimes it feels like doubt. Sometimes it even feels like planting seeds where nothing seems to be growing. Then came the discovery, commercial oil, the kind that changes generations. And suddenly, the same woman who once worked quietly as a secretary and later built a fashion business was now becoming one of the most powerful women in African business. But what stood out to me most while reading interviews and speeches she has given over the years is that Folorunsho Alakija never speaks like someone who believes success happened by luck. She constantly talks about faith, discipline, patience, and hard work. And maybe that is why her story feels bigger than money. Because when you really look closely, you stop seeing only the billionaires and start seeing the layers. The little girl sent abroad at 7, the student at secretarial studies, the fashion entrepreneur, the woman who entered oil when many thought it was impossible, the mother, the woman of faith, and finally, the billionaire. And that is exactly why we started this billionaire series, because too often we only see successful people from the finish line, the money, the luxury, the headlines, but we rarely pause long enough to understand the risk, the uncomfortable people, and the ordinary moments that quietly build extraordinary lives. And if this is the first story you're joining us for, stay close because we are unpacking the lives of Nigerian billionaires and
that
the
her
millionaires
family would
beyond
make this
money,
project
their failures,
her defining legacy.
turning points,
Your Excellency,
and
the
maybe even
Modupe
the
and
similarities they
Folorunsho
unknowingly share with everyday people like us. Because one thing this research is teaching us is simple: success leaves a lot of clues.